Hey everybody. My topic today is wheel balance. When I got the car put back together and on the road, one of the first things I had to do was buy a new set of tires because the old ones were horribly flat spotted. If you go back and look at one of my older videos, I've got some pictures of how bad they were because the tires had been flat for 20 years or something, and they were permanently deformed. So anyway, I bought a nice new set of these Goodrich G-Force Comp2 All Seasons. And I think there's a Comp2 Plus out now. They weren't, when I bought these, I think that was just coming out and they didn't have them in this size. But there's a Comp2 that's not an all season, it's a summer only tire. But I live in Michigan, and when you run the summer tires, they don't really want you to run them below about 40 degrees. If you're in the mid-30s, you're kind of out of luck. And so I went with the all-season, not because I'm going to ever drive it in snow, but I wanted the wider temperature band. I had an issue with vibration. And the IROC has a very stiff suspension. So sometimes it's a little hard to sort out. You get out on the highway, for example, and the suspension it picks up every tar strip and every rumble and all of the character of the road surface, which from a performance standpoint is great. I'm not complaining about that. But it caused, if you were driving a Cadillac with a really smooth suspension, it would be easier probably to pick up some of the vibration and sort it out from the basic road surface stuff. In any case, I drove for several thousand miles. And what I was picking up was when I got above about 50, 60 miles an hour, it would start to shake a little bit. When I got up to about 70, 75, our speed limits out here are 75 miles an hour. It had a pretty good shake. So I went through and I checked my rotors and my drums to make sure that they were in good shape and not out of balance. And the suspension, the bearings in the front. I kind of went through the car to make sure the car wasn't at fault. And I couldn't find anything. So having about 5,000 miles on it, I went back down to my dealer and I asked him for something called road force balancing. I don't know if you're familiar with that. I actually didn't realize till I did some hunting. I didn't even realize it was available. Let me back up a little bit. In my life in the auto world, working around assembly plants and product engineering and so forth, in production, we had ways, the plants had ways to match up tires and rims. And I'm not sure what they used on these aluminum ones, but if you go all the way back to the steel, typically what they would do is find, and I think it was the low spot on the rim, on a steel rim, and that was where they punched the hole for the valve stem. On an aluminum wheel, you'd have to mark it some other way. And then the tire manufacturers would put a dot on the sidewall that might be a self-adhesive spot, and that corresponded to what I'll call the high spot, or the stiffest part of the tire. And what they would do is match that dot to the place where the valve stem went through. And that took some of the you can have a perfectly balanced wheel assembly and still have the car shake, because the tire isn't stiff, the same stiffness all the way around. Some places it's stiffer than others just by the nature of the way the cords and everything lay. And the wheels, especially in the stamped steel days, aren't perfectly round. So the plant had this method of taking a dot on the tire and lining it up with the valve stem. Out in the outside world, when we got to aftermarket, for many years, there was never anything around. The best you could do, and my dad had this done one time, was they would spin wheels on the car and do an on-the-car balance and spin them with a motor, and then that would take out kind of any of the drum or rotor imbalances and so forth. But now the sophistication, it's gotten a lot better, and what a road force balance is they have a roller on the machine. And instead of just spinning the wheel and getting it to balance, they run the wheel up against this roller at a load that's roughly what it would be, the weight on the tire. and then they balance it, and the machine checks the balance with it rolling against this roller. And one of the main ways that you fix it is, in addition to balance, is if the balance isn't right, your tire technician can take the tire down, break it down, and rotate it around on the rim and reinflate it. And again, do what the assembly plants do, which is match the tire to the rim so that you get a better assembly. Because they had balanced these by conventional methods, and it just plain wasn't good enough. So I went into the tire store, and it was time for a rotation. Well, not quite. I had 5,000 miles, and I'd probably normally rotate them at 7. So I said, let's go in and let's do a rotation, and please do a road force balance for me. Now, rotation's a little more fun on one of these cars, because if you haven't been around one of these IROCs, the wheels are unique front to rear. So there it says, right here it says rear. So you've got a rear wheel that's different than the front wheel. And the tires roll only in one direction. They've got a rotation arrow on them. So when you rotate them, you actually have to break them down, take them off the wheels anyway. So you take them off the wheels and you get them remounted. And I think it cost me $88 to get them broken down and put back up to do the rotation. But the rotation was free. The rebalance was free. It was all in the package from when I bought the tires. But I did have to pay them to break them down. But in any case, the reason I'm making the video is, it was the first time I've ever gone through and had them do a road force balance. I wasn't aware until I did some research that that tool was available and how helpful that could be. And I'll tell you, it really smoothed the car out. And you know, I can go out there at 75 miles an hour and you still feel the tar strips and the road surface, because this car is tuned for a lot of road feedback. And as I said, I think that's great. I mean, the car handles really well. But now, you know, I was getting vibration in the dashboard, you know, it kind of shake a little bit. All of that's gone away. The road force balance was very, very effective, and I'm very happy with it. Also, these tires, even though they're the all-season and not the extra fancy compound summer tires, these really do stick, and I'm really happy with them. The last time I did a video on tires was when, you know, I had just had them put on the car. And now I've got a few thousand miles under my belt, and they really stick nice. And the IROC suspension, you go around the corners and boy, she just sticks like glue. It's really nice, neutral. It's fun to drive and go around corners with it. Really can't complain. These Goodrich tires are very nice. And I have to recommend, you know, if you're in a wheel balance situation and you've had them balanced and that doesn't work, make sure you find a shop that's got road force balance, because these machines they're really slick. And the techs did a good job on me. I was in and out in like 45 minutes. I had an appointment. They did a nice job for me. So, oh, and one last thing. When I reported the last time, they were giving me a hard time about having wheel spacers. These Camaros and Firebirds with the aluminum drums especially, and aluminum wheels, have a wheel spacer. And they took them out the last time and said, hey, it's against company policy to have wheel spacers. And I wasn't smart enough at the time. I was too new to this. So I went back and looked it up on the factory parts list and found, hey, yeah, those really were factory parts. So I printed one of those off and I took it with me to the tire store. And I said, hey, you know, these are factory parts. Please don't take them out this time. And the service guy turned to his manager and said, do we leave, you know, if it's a factory spacer, can we leave it in? He said, yeah, third gen Camaro, yeah, they stay in there. So it was all good. They recognized it and they put it back together right for me. Highly recommended to have them balanced this way if your conventional balance isn't enough. You don't always need the road force balance, but it takes them a little longer to do it. But if you have one that's having a tough time, you know, that's really a great way to go. Let me give you just a little bit more on wheel balance if you're not familiar with it. If you go all the way back to the 70s, or you know, 60s, 70s, probably early 80s, the main way people balanced
wheels was what we called bubble balance. And you had a machine that quite literally had a bubble in it. You'd balance the wheel on a point, essentially, and it had a bubble in the center, a lot like a level that you would use for leveling out in carpentry. That tells you when it's level. What you would do is put weights around the rim until the bubble centered up all the way around. I mean, it was all the way around the wheel because it could balance in any direction. And when you got the bubble centered up with the weights, it was in static balance. And then a good shop would take the weights and split them in half and put half the weights on the back side of the tire and the other half of the weights they would put on the front side of the tire. And that ensured that you had something that was balanced. Then the next refinement that came along says, we had wheels and tires that were in static balance, but when you were running down the road, uh, the weight may not be even all the way across the tire. The front side of the wheel could be heavier than the back side of the wheel. And so then they started doing spin balance, what they called a dynamic balance. Well, there were spin balancers that did static only, but let's skip that for now. A good dynamic balance would spin the wheel, and then it would tell you how much weight you needed to put on the outside of the wheel and where, and it would tell you how much weight you wanted to put on the inside of the wheel. Instead of like a static balance where you were putting half on each side, now you could stagger it and adjust it so that the wheel was in dynamic balance as it spun. So now we're kind of at the third step with this road force balance, where you still got the machine that spins the wheel, but now you're going to spin that wheel up against a roller and with a weight so that it simulates the weight of the car on that tire. And so now you've done the static part, you've done the dynamic part, and now you're adding in the effects of the spring rate of the tire and any out of roundness that you have in the wheel or tire, and its net effect against the roller, which is very much like spinning against the road surface, rolling against the road surface. And I think you'd find that today, um, goodness, I'll go back to the 70s, right? Most of the tires were 78 series tires. They were 78% as tall as they were wide. The Camaro mine is 50%. They're 50 series tires. Today we're running tires that are 30 series tires and maybe even some 20s. And the shorter the sidewall gets, the more sensitive you get to the stiffness of the tire, because there's less sidewall to soak it all up. And so then this road force balance starts to become more essential. And it's just another tool to make your car run right. And like I say, it worked really well for me on the Camaro. And if you need it, I mean, you can start with a basic dynamic balance, and it may be perfect. But if your tires are, have a little bit of variation in them. I don't mean that they're defective. It's the natural order of tires is they're not always perfectly. The spring rate varies as the tire goes around, and it's just the natural nature of steel belts and polyester cord and rubber and all of that molded together, and then attached to a wheel. So I say another tool in your toolbox to know when you get into road issues with your car.
I hope you enjoyed that video. If so, please subscribe to my channel.